So today I'm very happy to welcome Tim Willey of ForgeRock as our guest. He's Senior Vice President of Commercial Strategy and Operations. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. And if I'm correct, and please correct me if I'm wrong, ForgeRock is based in San Francisco and has raised $230 million up to now.
That sounds about right. Yes, we're based in San Francisco. Originally came out of Europe. Our founders originally came from Bristol in the UK and Oslo in Norway, but now headquartered in San Francisco.
So European-based originally. That's interesting. Tell me more about ForgeRock in about 1 minute. What are you doing?
Okay, of course. So we're a leading identity and access management company. So our strategy is we help people safely and simply access the connected world. We offer both consumer identity and access management. So if you log into your applications online through your mobile phone, we help a lot of companies with that. Or also as an employee, if you access your workforce applications remotely, a lot of people are doing that with COVID. We offer those types of workforce access management and governance as well, so both consumer and access.
Okay, perfect. And what is your job at ForgeRock? Also about, you can take 1 minute or two if you want.
Sure. So I run a team called Commercial Strategy and Operations, and that includes a number of customer-facing teams, such as our SDR team, our customer success team, renewals teams, as well as a number of the operational teams like our sales operations, sales enablement, and business operations teams. So
that's a wide range from basically creating leads to capturing leads to onboarding and maintaining happy client relationships and even more. Is that correct?
Yeah, one way to think about it is it's a pretty cross-functional team. So I think a lot of what we're probably going to talk about is this need for teams to work more collaboratively and cross-functionally, particularly in a B2B SaaS environment. So a lot of my teams sort of embody that spirit and play multiple roles across the life cycle.
Can you give us a proxy of your company size and growth, be it revenue or number of customers or employees?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're privately funded, so we don't release data about our size, but I can say we're very fast growing, well north of $100 million in ARR right now. And we focus primarily on large enterprise customers. So you can kind of think of us as a bit like the Okta for large enterprise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that would have been my next question. Who's your ideal customer?
Ideal customers, typically the kind of global 5,000. So maybe companies with perhaps over $2 billion in revenue, maybe over 10,000 employees or 1 million consumers or customers, or a lot of other kind of large government organizations or public sector organizations. ARR varies, but typically is north of $100,000 to $200,000 ARR.
And within those companies, are there many stakeholders that you target, or is it one specific group that you want to win over?
Yeah, great. So we typically target three different types of stakeholders. Because we focus a lot on digital transformation and helping deliver great customer experiences, we often work with maybe if the company has a chief digital officer or a business owner who owns that particular customer experience. We also then, with our workforce solutions, interact a lot with the CIO of an organization or the CISO that sometimes sits across all of those. So chief business officer, chief digital officer, CIO and CISO are our typical stakeholders.
Okay, and geographic-wise, where are you operating, or where do you want to operate maybe also?
Sure. So we're a global company. We operate across the world, and we have typically like most companies here, we have our 3 main geos. We have the Americas, we have EMEA, and we have APJ.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. I mean, these are really helpful answers because from whatever you say now, everybody knows in what type of context you basically answer those questions. That's why I love to ask them in the beginning. So let's dive into the real interesting stuff. Not that ForgeRock is not interesting. It's super interesting. I could probably talk about your company for hours, but let's talk about what non-successful B2B SaaS companies are doing wrong in your point of view. Especially, of course, when it comes to sales and marketing, I mean, of course.
Sure. It's interesting. I mean, I think if you look in the industry, there's there's sort of a bit of a legacy way of trying to deliver these services, which I often kind of think about more like a supply chain. So the old world of delivering software was, the product team would build a product, they'd hand it over to the marketing team who would market the product, they'd hand it over to sales, who'd sell the product, sales would hand it over to the customer, and maybe support's in there in the background, excuse me. And maybe, 2 to 3 years later, the product team might release a brand new product and you go through that whole cycle again. And so you have this sort of legacy mindset or legacy approach to delivering for customers that is more like a sort of a relay race where each team is kind of handing on the baton from what they do to the next person, and eventually it gets to the customer. And that's really the opposite of, I think, how customers want to engage, and how the market's turning, particularly for large enterprise customers, as we shift to more as a service delivered models. Really, companies that are successful in this space now, I think, are much more organizing themselves around the customer, recognizing that customers interact with the company digitally across the full life cycle. And that means that organizationally, operationally, so a lot of what I focus on is kind of organizational operations. A lot of the ways that companies are structuring themselves, a lot of the ways that they're rewarding organized teams, a lot of the ways they're driving incentives, growing culture with an organization, are much more focused around customer success and customer outcomes. And that means that teams like, the product teams, the marketing teams, sales teams, they all still have their core role, but they have to be able to play outside of their position. It's a bit more like maybe like a pickup basketball game. Where sometimes you're on the offense, sometimes you're on the defense. So you have people in sales who need to understand how to deliver services. You have people in product who need to understand how to market to customers. You need to have people in marketing who understand the intricacies of selling. So it's this switch to more of a sort of from a vertical supply chain focus to more of a horizontal skill set and capability that's really organized around the customer, that I think is the biggest transition that we're going through at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And what measures should a company that wants to be successful or grow really fast focus on, in your point of view?
Yeah, another good question. When it comes down to successful as a service companies, particularly with B2B segments, there's really only 2 drivers of growth I think companies need to focus on. It's pretty simple. One is you've got to grow your new ARR, and that's either from brand new customers, new logos, or upsell, cross-sell to existing customers. And you've got to reduce churn. So grow new ARR, reduce churn. Those are the only 2 levers that you have.
Let me just add one thing for the ones who, a second, just for the ones who don't know what ARR is, it's annual recurring revenue. So the revenue that you have each year, because usually software as a service companies have long-term contracts. Sorry to interrupt, but maybe some of our listeners are not that familiar.
Of course, that's a helpful add, absolutely. So ARR, annual recurring revenue. As a subscription company, as a subscription business, maybe if we start with the customers. Customers really want to have an ongoing pay for what they're using, getting value from services, getting value from their solutions over time. The old model of buying a whole bunch of perpetual licenses, capitalizing that and depreciating that over time, and then paying an annual maintenance fee. That's really, companies are transitioning away from that, partly because oftentimes you just buy a whole bunch of shelfware. So you spend millions of dollars on software that would never actually get delivered, or delivered in a way that you can actually realize the value of the original business case. And so one of the benefits of moving to a cloud delivered solution is it becomes more of a subscription. You're paying for what you're using. And so it's a much more healthy indicator of customer success, because they can stop paying. They part of the benefit of the subscription is you don't have to pay everything up front. You pay for it as you go. Which means that the churn becomes much more important. So if you go back to those 2 drivers of annual recurring revenue, it's really, if you think about like a bucket. So you have a bucket full of water, you have water coming in the top, and maybe it's a leaky bucket, so some water's kind of going out the bottom. So what you're trying to do is to maximize the amount of water that you have in the bucket. So how do you grow the new ARR, the water coming in the top, and how do you try and plug the churn, the water going out the bottom? And the combination of those 2 is really the growth in your ARR business from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, what we typically call our net ARR or net annual recurring revenue. And that's probably the one most important indicator, I think, of success for companies today in this space. B2B SaaS, we're lucky to be in a fast-growing, large market, fast-growing. So the primary metric in terms of success of a company is growth. Obviously, there's other measures like profitability and cash flow and leverage and things which are much more important for slower growing companies. But because the market is so large and so fast growing, to be successful, you want to be taking market share. So that focus on growth is really the number 1 measure. So if I could boil it all down, I would say focus on net ARR. That's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think many companies are focusing on top line growth, but are somehow not really focusing or even measuring correctly churn. So how do you approach the goal of reducing churn?
Yeah, good question. Churn is one of those things that is incredibly simple to describe, but can become incredibly complicated in terms of how you actually measure it. And one of the interesting things to point out is that there's currently no generally accepted accounting principle for defining churn. So when it comes back to that measure I was talking about net ARR being the most important yardstick for success, we don't actually have clarity to be able to compare one company to another company in the public market, partly because of this reason, because churn is something that actually becomes quite complicated once you get underneath the covers. You know, just to give you a couple of examples of some of that complexity, you have issues around things like co-termination. So where you have a 12-month contract and you have a customer coming in halfway through that contract, they want to buy some more, they want to reduce their expenditure, and they want to co-terminate their contracts to the same start and end date to make it easier for them to contract. That means that during that process, you're going to have ARR values that shift up and down from a bookings perspective. And if you don't have clear policies as how to treat those, then your churn rate could be going up and down for reasons that aren't actually to do with business fundamentals. They're just to do with the fact that your cash flow is going up and down. And there's a list of about sort of 10 to 15 kind of corner cases around churn, but actually I've explored in some other conversations. I did a presentation at a SaaS conference all about this topic, where it becomes a bit of a science project to really clearly define all of the rules around churn. Okay, if this happens, you know, how are you going to treat FX impact on churn? How are you going to treat if the customer stays with you but they buy through a different channel partner? Or how are you going to treat if the customer stops buying product A but starts buying product B? All of these issues have quite an impact on churn, but it's definitely one of those things that it's worthwhile spending the time really to think about it and to define it in a way that reflects the reality of the customer experience and the customer value. Because if you're not measuring it properly, you can't track it, you can't predict it, and therefore you can't hope to impact it.
You can also send me later on the link to the show where you explained it in detail, or
Sure.
if you have a document or a blog or whatever, because I think that's super interesting. I mean, we could probably talk for the rest of the time about this topic, but if you already covered it, let's pick your brain on other things. But that's a really good insight, and I think I also think that many people think it's so easy. Yeah? You lose a customer, that's churn, but it's not. If you think about all the edge cases, and you have to have solutions for that. Super good tip. So one question that I run a super small company, yeah. So it's like compared to you, it's a blip. But still, we start to implement the whole. I want to make our customers happy and keep them longer really early on already. But what I notice is that sometimes I only get noticed when things went sideways, so to say. And do you have an insight or tip on how to basically approach this whole churn topic before bad things happen?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of common observation, and also relates to just where the industry's at. I mean, we talked about this transition from kind of on-premise, more vertical, more supply chain focused to more as a service. And one of the transitions we're going through as an industry is this idea of shifting from focusing on the renewal and the conversation around the renewal, which oftentimes can be a lagging indicator. If you find out about a churn risk, it tends to be oftentimes too late in that process. Maybe the customer wasn't happy with you and they started talking to a competitor, or maybe the customer never got value from the solution in the first place, and so they're questioning the value. And so oftentimes companies kind of work back from the renewal and try to think, well, how do I save this churn? And exactly to your point, I think a much better way of trying to address this is to avoid it in the first place. You know, try and target the root cause issue, which really starts with really getting a better clarity around what is it the customer's trying to achieve. So what is the customer outcome that you're trying to solve for? You know, customer success is often described as sort of a combination of delivering to a customer outcome, but also with a great customer experience. And so thinking about how you build those two components into the full life cycle is absolutely critical. So how you think about, you know, marketing, generating awareness, how is it that we're creating value for customers? And you think about how do you engage from a sales perspective and really capture and understand what the customer's trying to achieve. write down what are the outcomes that are defined as success from the customer's perspective, put a time frame against that, and build that into your ongoing work plan going forward. So you have a plan to deliver to customer success and deliver to customer outcomes. And then you can start to flag along that if things are slipping. So, if we have a target let's say we have a customer that we're just looking to bring up online with our new cloud offering. And let's say they have 2 or 3 different applications that they want to plug into that on the consumer side so that people can start using the service to get that experience benefit. You can start to track progress against that. And if your applications aren't getting teed up in the right time, or if there are issues in terms of go live around that, that's very much a leading indicator of not getting value, which delivers the churn outcomes that you're trying to avoid. So try and build into the product design, try and build into the sales motion, try and build into particularly the handoff points. So there's a natural juncture where sales have sold a product. The historical mindset would be they'd run on to the next customer and they'd go try and retire more quota. I think we're seeing successful sales teams is much more focused around building that longer term relationship with customers. But to answer your question, I'd say look at building into the product, look at building into the sales process, particularly the pre-sales process, some gates, some design decision checkpoints that become the plan of record that you're then going to measure customer success against. And then look at how you can track and report against that. There are plenty of tools out there like Gainsight that help you understand the health of your customers and help you get in front of those risks. So try and identify some of the causes of your churn, try and identify some of the leading indicators of those causes, and put in place plans to go after them.
Love it. You reminded me of one of our own little cases here, where you said aligning around goals for your customer. What I learned is also the hard way, so to say. We did a good job with the customer, but the owner of the company was basically one of the main decision makers. And we didn't bring him on board at the very beginning. So he had a totally different expectations than what we aligned on with the team. And so in the end, we lost that one customer, not because we did a bad job, just because we didn't align with the whole decision maker team on what the perfect outcome should be, so that we work towards. So it sounds so easy, but if you don't do it correctly, a lot of things can go sideways. And if you do exactly what you said, those things can save you a lot of money. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's particularly true for larger enterprise customers, because you don't typically just deal with one department or one division. Whether you're talking about the buying process, the buying approval process, the stakeholder engagement process, the influencer process, the executive support, we actually have a very structured process we go through to make sure we capture all of those different decision makers. We capture the metrics for success, and we understand and capture through the sales process what's the approval process, who do we need to get support for to move forward, and how do we make sure we have that buy-in as we go through the process. And yeah, it's definitely one of those things where a little bit more investment upfront can save you a whole lot of pain downstream. And as you know, the cost of acquiring companies and customers is typically order of magnitude higher than the cost of saving or retaining customers. And it's often much more profitable, if you just want to put a financial lens on it, to invest in saving customers and making sure that they're happy, as opposed to losing them and then going to have to find other customers to fill that bucket.
Absolutely. Yeah. I should have talked to you earlier. We would have avoided this one. Now the interesting part starts with, in theory, that sounds all logical, I think. Yeah. On the one hand, like, you have these cross-functional teams that don't just hand over the customer to the next team, but they work together. They stay in touch. They have kind of the same goals. But now, how do you build this system in practice? I mean, how do you do that? Because I, looking as someone who doesn't do it like this, looking from the outside in, some people would say, well, sales is always sales. They just want to sell more to buy the next Porsche. And marketing are these guys that maybe now are measured with leads, but somehow they just want to do brand awareness. Well, and customer success is so new that most people don't even have any notion of what they should exactly do. How do you do that in practice?
Yeah, good question. I think I think first of all, recognizing that it's a journey, right? So recognizing that all of these teams need to go through some degree of transformation, and we need to approach that change and that transformation in a coordinated fashion. So it's not good enough, I think, just to say, okay, marketing, you need to do this, sales, you need to go do that, services, you need to change, and we'll see you, in 6 months' time. The way that we change, we have to change together. And that's kind of a big realization, I think, for me personally, as I've gone through this, is how do we make sure that you bring people along on that journey? And it's some simple things. So some things like setting up some shared goals and objectives, right? I mean, there is, I think, a bit of a fallacy now that, that sales is completely coin operated. I think, there's a sense now, particularly with the good salespeople, that they understand now that the game has changed, and that for them to be successful, they need to build more of a land and expand model, and they need to invest in existing customer relationships to drive upsell, cross-sell. And you can reinforce that with metrics. So, we actually, for our sales management and above, we incentivize the teams now around net ARR. So it's not just go after new ARR, we include churn as an equal and opposite component of that, because if you can save $100,000 in churn, it means that we can afford to not have to get $100,000 in new ARR. So think about behaviors, think about the jobs, the roles we're trying to do, and then what are the incentives you can put in place to drive that. And that's not just across sales. In other companies I've worked at, we've had a model where the product team actually get some portion of their incentive or review performance review measured against the adoption of their features. So they go out there and prioritize what they think is important to customers, and they spend a lot of time working to build and develop that into products. Typically, that's where the relationship stops in terms of feedback. With other service offerings, you can actually understand, what kind of traction you're getting around interest in trialwares, what kind of traction are you getting around interest in trying out new features and functionality from your existing products, and where are we seeing that adoption? And where we're seeing it, let's reinforce that, and let's course correct to understand if we're not. So I think thinking across the life cycle from a metrics perspective is important. If we pick on marketing for a second, I think, again, going through a lot of change, measurement's always been important, I think, for marketing, but we now have much greater degree of understanding the sort of the holy grail of marketing, which for me has always been that kind of return on investment idea. If I put more resource and investment focus in this particular marketing activity, how can I say with confidence that it's going to deliver more of a better outcome in terms of not just pipeline generation, pipeline creation, but pipeline conversion? So the quality of the leads that you're generating. And so tracking that, putting in place measures around things like the expectation for how much of my business, if I'm a salesperson, how much should be coming from marketing, how much should be coming from partners, how much should I be generating myself. We have a sort of a third rule here at ForgeRock, where we say, if I'm an account executive in sales, I expect, or should expect, to get at least a third of my pipeline and my bookings and my ARR from my marketing and my SDR channel. I should get at least a third from my partner channel, because we work very much with large enterprise customers. We work very much with the partners of those large enterprise customers, which tend to be global systems integrators. And that leaves a third, which I need to go off and find for myself. And so things like that, building those goals and objectives in from the beginning, and understanding and tracking performance against those is a very useful way of kind of making sure that people are feeling like they've got some skin in the game and that they can see where they're being successful. It's very much a positive reinforcing thing, because if you can show these teams the value that they're providing, and they can understand that if I do more of this and less of that, I can deliver more value for the customers and more value for the company, then it's a win-win.
What kind of system are you using for that? Is it something like OKRs, for example?
Sure. So it varies a little bit on team by team, but OKRs is a very good principle to adopt. I think, and a very healthy principle to adopt. I think having a regular cadence of planning conversations. So I think there's sort of some big themes to answer the question, that kind of the bigger question you're perhaps asking there. One is this concept of moving away from just a big annual planning cycle, where every year, once a year, you do a lot of work, you come up with a plan for the next 12 months, you go through a lot of budgeting exercise, figure out what you can afford. You then typically, if you're a growing company, come up with a number of people you want to go hire. Then you then go knock on the door of the talent recruiting team and say, hey, I need to go hire a bunch of people in the next 2 weeks. And they say, well, I only have capacity to hire this many, and you have growing pains. And so I think to successfully take advantage of the growth opportunities, you need to move into a much more frequent planning process. So almost like a rolling 12-month planning process, at least quarterly, to help understand and course correct around what's the right balance of resources. And then I think the second thing you can do is create some more shared goals across the teams. So if you have objectives in terms of how many customers you want to get onto your cloud solution, for example, or what kind of growth in net ARR you want to see, or what kind of reduction in churn you want to see, set some big audacious goals for that, get everyone aligned around them, publicize them, celebrate the success against those, and start to build some joint goals where you can still get the right balance of holding teams accountable, but you also recognize, and they recognize, that for us to be successful, you have to work together in a different way than perhaps you have in the past.
I like it a lot. And now I'm super interested. Let's start with the first two ones, who are usually sometimes like cats and dogs, marketing and sales. So how does it look in practice for goals that are shared for marketing and sales?
Yeah, of course. Good question. I'm particularly proud of our SDR team, because we actually, I think last month we delivered quadruple the pipeline that we created from the same period 12 months ago. Wow. So that's a pretty cool. I mean, some of that was through the increase in headcount, but we definitely didn't quadruple the size of the team. So I think a lot of that was down to how we thought about the role in terms of what we're trying to deliver for outcomes, and then how we work together differently across marketing, SDR, and sales. So yeah, some of the things we did there, we changed. First of all, we changed the definition of success. So I think historically, as you mentioned, kind of cats and dogs, there's always been a little bit of a, and this is an industry thing, there's always been a little bit of the sales saying the leads aren't any good, marketing sales saying to sales they're not very good at converting the leads they have got, and if they could just put them accurately into SFDC, they'd see that there's a huge amount of value that they're delivering. And companies often spend a lot of time sort of trying to solve that symptom, if you like, in terms of this marketing and sales finger pointing, and as opposed to addressing some of the root causes of that. So some of the things you can do there to help are, first of all, as I say, set up some clear expectations. So work with the sales teams, get an honest perspective around how they're feeling, right? In terms of the SDR support they're getting, the marketing support they're getting. You need to recognize and baseline that sort of current relationship, and do the same thing on the marketing side. So ask the marketing teams, look, where do you think it's working with your sales teams? Which geos, which regions do you think you are being most productive? And share that both ways, right? So share the marketing feedback with sales, share the sales feedback with marketing, and have a very open conversation around what we need to achieve collectively as a single organization, a single team. So one of the things that I think can really help is to organize your teams more around kind of customer pods or sales pods. So for each of I very much believe the kind of upside down pyramid principle, where leadership is supporting the organization, and the closer you get to customers, the more important you are. So kind of leadership's at the bottom and customers at the top. And so building a really strong collaboration across the local sales and marketing teams is critical to improving the performance of that engine. So think about ways you can build that through everything from just taking the team out for lunch, or putting some budget aside for some team building, through to structures, objectives, goals, through to reporting, and then start to think about how you can really capture the end-to-end process and understand what's working and what's not working. So think about the types of marketing activities that you might be investing in. So whether that's digital marketing, whether that's event-based marketing, whether that's activity or account-based marketing, and come up with a plan that says, if we invest in these areas, it's going to be wrong, but we think we're going to generate this much business. And if we look at the sort of the mechanics across that, if we want to generate this much business, with this conversion rate, we need to generate this many opportunities, and with this conversion rate, we need to generate this many leads, and therefore we need to spend our money in this way. So come up with a plan, but recognize that it's not going to be the right plan because it hasn't been measured before. Build those metrics, communicate those metrics, and then just get going. Just get started on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, reviewing performance against that, and just see what's working and what's not working. We found it really powerful to expose at a very granular level the contribution of all of these different teams, because it identified gaps and opportunities across all of the teams. You know, we had an example where you might have some regions that are taking a very small number of leads, but converting them very well. You might have other regions that have a whole bunch of leads that aren't getting converted very well. And that's a sales thing. How do we improve the enablement and training for sales such that we can drive an improvement in conversion of the same kind of leads that are coming in? You might have SDRs who are actively responding very quickly to leads that are coming in. You know, one of the things we found is that if you can respond to a lead quickly, it has a much higher chance of converting. And so what you don't want is a whole bunch of leads sitting in someone's queue somewhere that no one's going after. You know, someone says, hey, can you contact me? I'm interested in your solution. I found out about you online. I'd love to speak to someone. And then a week goes by, right? I mean, they've probably forgotten who you are by then. So putting in place measures around activity levels, responsiveness, SLAs is another thing you can do. You know, put an SLA around, okay, handshakes. So SDR to marketing. These are the quality of leads that I want. These are the quantity of leads that I want. And I'm going to focus on, I want you to focus on finding me prospects. I don't really care about existing customer leads. The real value is, not that I don't care about them, but what I really care about is getting new customers into the funnel. And I'm going to, you know, incentivize you around those. And then here's what you can hold me accountable to. You know, every time you send me a lead, I'll respond to it within a certain time frame. And I'll close it out in the system so that we can see the performance. So just understanding how this works together. Number one. Number two, putting in place measures and goals and metrics. And then number three, just continuously improvement, continuously learning. The metrics will probably be wrong. I think that's fine. But you'll learn through this process what the metrics should be. And most importantly, you'll understand a little bit of an internal benchmark around every company has parts of the business that's doing better than other parts of the business. And that's one of the hidden gems, I think, particularly as you become a larger global organization, is doing, you know, what you could call kind of internal benchmarking. It's always great to do external, and there's tons of metrics and stats around, you know, what MQL to SQL, what those good ratios, things look like. But I actually quite like the internal benchmarking because it drives a bit of competition in the teams. You know, one of the things I found that's really helpful in my career is just showing people and giving them feedback on how they're doing relative to their peers is an incredibly powerful motivator. I remember I was doing one project where earlier in my career where a manager said to me, look, you can spend like 80% of your time trying to build out the best possible system, the best possible solution, the best possible metrics, the best possible reporting, and you could have the best design in the world. But if you don't spend much time on reinforcing it, then the thing won't be successful. What you actually want to do is spend 80% of your time on the reinforcement side of the metrics. So don't worry too much about the design, don't worry too much about what the metrics are, but spend all of your time telling people how they're doing, providing that feedback and showing them how they can improve. And I found that to be something that's really held true, at least in my career. One of my favorites there is, just to tell a story, is around discounting. So, you know, discounting is one of those things that, a bit like churn, you kind of open the box and there's all these things that start flying out and questions that start getting raised. And and you can become very sophisticated very quickly. I think you know, previously you told me a bit of, you have the mathematics background. I mean, there's a lot of statistics that you can do and relationships around, okay, if it's this type of customer in this type of geography, they bought this type of stuff before in this type of industry, and it's a Wednesday, and it's this MAE who happens to, you know, work very well with that partner, then, you know, here is the discount goal that you should allow. And that's all great. And there's a whole ton of cool tools out there that help you do that. The thing I found most powerful in my career is actually just showing people how they're doing versus their peers. So just like stack ranking performance against discounting, publishing that to everyone and saying, okay, leaders, here's how you're doing. And then I used to get calls from the people at the bottom of the list saying, hey, I'm at the bottom of this list. I don't really like being at the bottom of this list because I'm a bit competitive. So can you help me get to the top of this list? So that sort of people side is something I think is often forgotten about. It's really important.
Love it. And you can even start it as a super small company. I mean, one advice I heard some time ago was always hire 2 salespeople or 2 SDRs, so at least you have a little bit of competition going on. So even on a small size you can start. But I mean, of course, if you're such a big organization, looking for best practices and measuring it with the same kind of measures will yield a lot of insights, I'm pretty sure. Or you find some service providers that can help you solve this problem if you're not as big, but you need some really good and trusted benchmarks maybe. One hands-on question, can you name 1 or 2 KPIs that both sales and marketing are measured against, like something like created opportunities or so?
Yeah, sure. So the way that we think about that pipeline and measures across that pipeline, we have probably 3 or 4 key ones, and it's really important, I think, to share those together, because you don't want to over-index just on one particular measure versus another. So if you work back from a sales perspective, what ultimately we care about, we talked about was net ARR, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. If you want to work back from that, if you're talking marketing and SDRs, typically what we like to focus on is ARR we're getting from new logos or new prospects. So marketing is incredibly valuable across all of our customers and across the market, but its most value, particularly if you're a smaller growing company, is in building awareness and generating awareness, which is measured in terms of new customers that are coming in and creating business. Well, that's how you grow. You get new customers. You can only grow so far with existing customers. So we tend to focus on new logos and how much pipeline has converted into ARR in a given period from those new logos. That's sort of the yardstick at this end of the spectrum. Obviously, a lot of stuff goes into that, some of which marketing impacts, some of which they don't. But it's important to start with that and to track against that, because then you can understand and root cause where things are working, where things aren't working. What we then tend to work into is across the sales processes, we have this idea of what we call a stage 0 opportunity and a stage 1 opportunity. And you can call them different things, but from our perspective and our parlance, a stage 0 opportunity is we have a lead that's come in through various forms or various channels, and we've converted that lead into a meeting. So the customers agreed to meet with us. They're interested in hearing more about us. Maybe they have a project, maybe they don't. We don't know yet. Well, we might not know yet. But that meeting is the first kind of critical hand point and touch point, typically enabled by the SDR between marketing and sales. And then we have this concept of that meeting. Yes, there is an opportunity, or there isn't an opportunity. And if there's any follow-on, it's like, okay, yeah, you've spoken to me as a customer. That sounds interesting. Can you come and meet some of my friends in my other team? You might be interested to hear more. Or actually, it's great. I'm talking to you because I've got an RFP, and can you come and engage with me around that? Any of these things that lead to further conversations, we would classify that as a stage 1 opportunity in our Salesforce system. So that's kind of then officially in the pipeline. We wouldn't tend to necessarily have a dollar value yet, but it would be the start of that process. So we look at how much booking comes out the other end, how many opportunities we're generating, stage 0, stage 1, and what's the conversion rate between those? And then what's the conversion rate between stage 1 to close 1 business? And then working back from stage 0, it's really what we call our engaged leads. How many engaged leads are we creating? So marketing creates all sorts of leads in all sorts of different ways. Common to many companies, you typically want to have sort of a threshold score. So if you're scoring leads against certain attributes, once a lead kind of bubbles to a certain level, it's deemed like, okay, well, I want the SDR to go contact that person. They've visited our website, they've downloaded a white paper, they've registered in our online community. Seems like they're ready to talk to us. Let's go try and contact them and do some outreach. So we have this concept of an engaged lead and how many engaged leads you have. So engaged leads to meetings to opportunities to ARR is kind of at the highest level how we think about it, and then just build up a plan that says, okay, next 12 months, we need to generate this much business from our new logos, because our plan is split between new logos and existing customers. I mentioned net ARR is new ARR minus churn. New ARR is existing customers, new customers. That new customer piece of new ARR, put a number against it, come up with an average deal size, put a number of customers against it. That's your goal. Work back from that in terms of, okay, if we have to win, 100 customers, how many opportunities do we need to generate to win 100 customers? What's our win rate typically? And based on that, how many opportunities do we have? If we want to have that many opportunities, how many meetings do we need to generate? What's our meeting to opportunity conversion rate historically? What does good look like? Okay, that means we need to generate this many meetings. Okay, but how do we then convert? What do we need for meetings? We need leads. How many leads do we need to convert into meetings? Put that ratio in there, put those numbers in there. Very quickly, you'll come up with a number. Build that out at least at a geo level. If you can, lower than that. I mean, I like going all the way down to the individual salesperson, so you can start to see, because you might actually at a geo level, you might have one geo that's doing really well, another geo that's not doing really well, and think, okay, this geo is doing really well, we need to copy them, whatever they're doing there. And this geo over here is terrible, we've got to go fix it all, and it's a complete mess. Break it down the next level, you might realize that this first geo, call them Geo A, is doing really well because, out of the 20 reps they've got, you know, 4 reps are hitting it out of the park and getting absolutely everything that they could possibly need, and 300% of their, you know, of their lead opportunities. These other reps over here are getting 0, right? And whereas maybe in the poor performing geo, it's a little bit more distributed. So you need to kind of go down that next level. And that was actually one of the learnings we had when I talked about the shared feedback across the teams. Even where teams were doing well, you can't just measure necessarily the first order, which is, okay, how much am I delivering to my overall goal for that geo, for that region? You have to do a second order. And one of my favorite second orders is sort of percentage attainment. So how many of your field reps are getting the love and attention that they feel they should be? This is where the kind of the distribution starts to come in, because you can quite commonly find that you can have a geo or a region where you're hitting the numbers, but people aren't happy. And that's because 20% of people are hitting their numbers and they're very happy, but 80% of people aren't. And therefore you're hearing mostly that you're not happy. And so taking it down to something where you can actually say at an individual sales territory. Remember I talked about upside down pyramid? For those groups of customers, for that opportunity, how are we doing against that? And we found that to be really powerful to really kind of get to the root cause issues and try and address them. Mm-hmm.
Love it. I mean, it's really, you can almost imagine, as you say, it's like the sales funnel with leads. They have the first conversation, maybe they become an opportunity, and if they do a good job and everything aligns, they become a customer. And along that, you try to boil it down as far down to the root level as possible to find out what really works and what doesn't. That's really interesting. One thing I'm really curious about, because that's something I am also thinking about right now for our organization, is how does the handover between sales and customer success work, and how do you incentivize both? Because you said before that sales should also be incentivized by the expansion of this one customer. So I'm really, and I have the feeling that, okay, yes, sales had the first initial contact and they had a good relationship and they won the customer, but someone has to have the long-term relationship with the customer, and sales cannot have it because they win and win more clients, and at some point they're at capacity and it's over. So how do you do that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. That I think it's very topical right now, because the question of incentives, and also then the flip side of that, which is the kind of commercialization of it, particularly around customer success, you know, it starts to become much more important as this becomes more of the sort of well-trodden path. I remember, you know, working on this quite a few years ago, and it seemed very brand new, but I think now it's much more well-trodden. But we're still facing this similar challenges. I think you can do a couple of things. First of all, make sure that you're focusing the sales team on the annual recurring revenue component. Some companies out there still pay on total contract value. So, you know, maybe you've got a very large quota, and the only way you can retire that is to sell big multi-year, multi-million pound contracts. You've kind of set yourself up for failure from the get-go then, because the only way that salesperson's going to be successful is to sort of try and go after as many big, massive opportunities as possible in the hope that at least one of them lands. And then they're going to move on to the next one, almost like a hit and run, right? Okay, I've sold that big customer. I've given them whatever they could possibly want, and I've given them the best possible deal, because all I care about is maximizing my total contract value. Unhealthy for the customer, unhealthy for the company. So first thing you need to do is to change the commissions model, the compensation model, focus much more around annual recurring revenue. I think then also education, enabling the teams to understand that this idea of selling to the full value of the customer in that initial sale is increasingly less likely. So the more standard path is more of a land and expand model. It's let's start you over here, prove the value. If you can prove the value to me over here, I'm going to give you these other opportunities over here. A good example for us is I talked about we do kind of workforce and consumer. Oftentimes we'll cross-sell from one into the other. So we'll start with a workforce deal. So we'll be supporting a customer, help all of their employees access all of their applications online, remotely, from home, etc., over their mobile. And then because we do a good job there, they introduce us to the consumer part of the business, where we go help deliver better identity and access solutions for the consumer side. So it's explaining and showing sales teams how they can be successful in taking a slightly longer term view of the relationship, and recognizing that land and expand is a significant opportunity. And in many ways, it's a lower risk opportunity for sales as well, because as opposed to the historical one where they had to get pretty hopeful that, you know, out of some of these really big whales, they're going to go try catch, right? That at least one of them lands. Otherwise, it's kind of binary. If it lands, I'm off to club and I buy my Porsche. If it doesn't land, I have to go find another job because I've missed my number by 100% or 90%, right? So land and expand allows a lot more recurring revenue, recurring incentives, recurring commissions for the sales team. And it also puts a much better partnership model between sales and customer success, because sales know that customer success is going to be super helpful. Because if customer success is focused on making sure the customers are helpful and building that longer term relationship, that is going to drive to expansion. That is going to drive to increase upsell cross-sell. That's going to drive to reduce churn, all of which lead to not just better ARR from that customer, but better referrals. And that's the other big thing, particularly in large enterprise, where one of the learnings we've really kind of taken to heart is that companies spend less and less time talking to sales about their solutions. They spend most of their time, particularly for a CIO, for example. Most CIOs, you know, if they're thinking about moving into a new area of business or, you know, building a new identity solution, first thing they're going to do is they're going to speak to all their 10 CIO buddies that they know, and ask them, you know, what do you use? What have you found? Do you like them? You know, how easy are they to deal with? And if they get negatives from those, then you're not even going to get involved in the conversation. So that idea of influencing and decision makers and building a good relationship with them is absolutely critical to longer term success. So I think the explaining to salespeople this is how the model works, showing them how they can be super successful in terms of their patch to hit it out of the park in terms of their numbers, and then making sure that you're building those incentives and reporting structure in over continuously looking at that over time, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Understood. But what I'm asking myself now, how do I put this into practice? So do they get a percentage of ARR of the customers they want? And is it decreasing over time, or is it staying stable? And the longer they stay and the more customer they want, the more money they earn. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we didn't talk about the customer success side, so I can answer that as well from an incentives perspective. Yes. I think from a sales team perspective, you want to build out a plan. So you want to build out a plan that shows them, okay, here's your territory, here are existing customers, here's your churn forecast. So here are your, 50, 20, whatever existing customers you have, and here are your, 3 to 4 that are at risk of churn. Here's how our customer success team is going to come in and help save those customers and make sure that we don't lose them. Here's your plan in terms of what is your plan to grow your existing relationships, and within those customers, what are the targeted sales plays to go from product A to product B, to expand the usage from 10% to 50%, and build all of those in as very specific sales plays. And then who are you going to go after in terms of your white space? So in your account patch, here are the 3,000 customers we've got. And of those, we've identified these 100 that we'll call big bets. And we're going to put in place account-based marketing strategies with marketing around those. So we'll invite them to virtual events. We'll do some very targeted against key decision makers, some targeted campaigns. And so you can give the team a forward view of how they can build those relationships with net new customers, as well as convert existing customers and expand existing customers, as well as save anything at risk of churn. So build that out at a territory level, and show people how they can go deliver it, and then build a reinforcement mechanism. So we talked about the prospect reinforcement with marketing. You hold marketing accountable to a third of the business and the majority of the prospects. And then from a customer success perspective, how do you think about incentivizing customer success? That's going to probably that could be like a whole other hour topic. But I think
can we do it in like 2-3 minutes? Because I want to ask my 5 rapid fire questions, and then the hour is already over.
Okay, so yes, I'll try and do it in 2 minutes. So there's a almost like philosophical debate around two things with customer success. One is this question, which is how should they be incentivized, and the other is whether you should charge for it and how you should charge for it. And I have a point of view around both, and I'll try and give them to you quickly. So I think from how do you incentivize? There's this old adage of helping selling doesn't help. Which would lead you towards, okay, the customer success team, you don't want them to have anything to do with financial outcomes, because that's like the kiss of death with customers if you start talking about financial outcomes, and you need to make sure that team is exclusively focused on being the customer advocate and making sure that the customer is successful. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that approach. I do think there's a balance though, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I like to build teams that have a combination of both of those. I like to have teams that are looking at both customer success, but have some skin in the game in terms of retention in particular. because then they can drive their customer success conversations, and they can see the value. They get that feedback. They can say, okay, I've invested in this relationship here. I've shown that it's driving success, and I've seen them now renew. And they were originally a churn customer, so I get a huge amount of internal satisfaction, sales, from delivering that. So I'm a believer in getting a balance across customer success and financial metrics for the customer success team. And then whether you should charge for it or not, I believe that customers value customer success, particularly when it comes to platform as a service type offerings where they need help. They typically would pay consultants for a lot of that type of work. So I believe that there's a good model to charge and try and bundle some of those services into the subscription package. How you do that is a different question, but I'm always a fan of the idea that if you give something away for free, then people will value it as free. And so I think there's an aspect of building that commercial relationship that can help with the funding of the model, the resourcing of the model, and the reinforcement.
Yeah, and if you can spend money on good people, everybody is more happy. So makes sense.
Right. That's right.
So now we are already at the end of our conversation, and Tim, I've got 5 short questions with take your time, but maybe you know your time frame. For 5 questions, so it will be one minute more or less without putting too much pressure on you. First question: what do you do to keep body and mind fit and sharp?
Good question. Well, I'm fortunate enough to live in Northern California, so we have ridiculously good weather out here. So I always like to try and get outside and do some exercise. I find that running in particular, I used to hate running, like when I first started early in my life, kind of doing some running. I remember training for a marathon, and it was just horrible. Lots of rain and painful. But I got to a stage where now I actually really enjoy it. I find it really refreshes my brain and it just completely kind of de-stresses whatever I'm thinking about and kind of refreshes the brain. So running or reading books. I love reading books about different topics. I'm continuously learning and trying to learn new stuff. So those are 2 things I do to try and keep myself fit and sharp, as they say. What
book are you reading right now?
I have a secret habit, which is I really like sort of popular books on physics, which is a bit of a strange topic, but there's all these books out there that try and explain and kind of show how far we are from understanding the reality of the world. And so I'm reading a bunch of books right now on quantum physics and trying to answer life big questions. So that's kind of fun. It's completely separate from my day job. So that's kind of fun. And the other book I'm reading at the minute is a book about the hidden life of trees, which is quite interesting. So it talks about how trees are communities and communicate with each other and look after each other. And I love that sort of learning new things. So those are my two books at the moment.
I'd have to have a look into this, and we put it into the show notes. What's your favorite business book?
Yes, I don't normally like business books. I guess I prefer sort of real life experiences, and I either like reading like really trashy thriller books, like airport books, or I like reading books that give me a lot of like really cool, interesting stuff really quickly. And I just kind of get a little bit bored with business books. I kind of feel most of the time they could say what they're saying in it like a really well drafted essay as opposed to like a long book. But one I have read recently I thought was okay is the Netflix book, No Rules Rules. So it's all about the Netflix culture and how they drive this continuous culture of reinvention. I think is really, really important. This idea right at the beginning of the conversation around everyone's going through change. It's the new normal now. And I like the idea of how you build a culture that encourages that.
Yeah, that is definitely a competitive advantage nowadays.
Yes.
Is there a favorite business leader you follow?
Good question. Let's see. I like the boldness of someone like Elon Musk. You've got to respect that. Always, just his tenacity is impressive. But I also like someone like, there's this guy over at Gainsight called Nick Mehta, who's very much a kind of a human leader, very authentic. And he's just incredibly creative. So I like to see what he's up to. He always makes things fun.
Very good. Who should be our next podcast guest and why?
Well, actually, you should try and get Nick. He would probably be up for it. He's a really good communicator, really personable leader, and incredibly authentic. So maybe he also would be able to talk to a bunch of these topics, probably far better than I would.
And now you can directly address our audience. Anything that we can help you with?
Feedback. Feedback is a gift, as they say. particularly constructive feedback, things you might disagree with. I love this concept of mining for dissent. You know, there's this cartoon picture of someone who introduces a boxer and says, look, here's my boxer, he's a world champion boxer. And the other person says, well, has he been in any fights yet? And he's like, well, no, but he's still the world champion. And so the same thing with ideas, right? Unless you introduce them into the boxing ring, unless you give a chance to understand what's working and what's not working. So I encourage that actually with my team. So if there are things that you disagree with or feedback around things that you think would help us on this journey, I'm always open to that and would love to hear from you.
Perfect. Where can people get in touch with you?
Twitter or email's fine. Yeah, tim.willey@forgerock.com. We can put the details in a link somewhere.
I'll put it into the show notes, your Twitter link and your email address. Thank you so much, Tim. It was a pleasure to have you on our show. And I could have talked for many more hours, but we are already up now. So thanks a lot.
My pleasure, Sammy. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for the time.